We are pleased to welcome our next speaker, Catherine de Dorlodot, partner at Governance Law, who has a large experience as independent non-executive board member. Governance Law is composed of business executives promoting integrity, good governance, and better law, with Catherine leading the governance pillar. During a career ranging from entrepreneur to top management and from corporate to SMEs, she notably co-founded the Whistleblowing Center. Catherine states that good governance is as much a matter of culture and values as it is a matter of structures and organization. We want to partner with actors convinced that good governance and human voices enrich business choices.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be with you today, and this is a pleasure to be welcomed within the ECEC conference. I'm part of Governance Law, and as a representative of Governance Law, I'm very pleased to be there. We have, as you heard, 3 pillars on which we're active. Integrity, and that is the topic of today. Compliance, this is all for you people, being compliance by design as well, so that the technologies are developed first time right. Better law, and there we're trying not to look at silos from different laws, but we're trying to combine the different laws. We're looking at, for example, GDPR asking to minimize the data of the people, while anti-money laundering is looking at maximizing the data of the people. So how do you combine that? And that's where we come in. We try to have a holistic point of view on all of that. And good governance, it's going to be the topic of today, but it's also, for me, a topic that is important as innovation governance, data governance, ecosystems governance come in. And like it was said in the introduction, we all have, within governance law, a personal, professional experience within government or companies. That makes that our advices are more grounded into the experience that we have had. Whistleblowing, that is, if you have any questions, we have experience into that domain, but this is not going to be my topic today. What I want to address with you is a few myths. And the first myth that I've been pointing out is that governance is sexy, while compliance is boring. It's a bit of a provocative statement for today, but I'm sure that with the audience that we have here, you will understand that you have been experiencing this information and this feedback sometimes. Second myth, CEOs act rationally. Board members act rationally. This is definitely a myth, and we all know that never comes emotions into the boardrooms. Third myth, we have, if you put the brightest people and the brightest minds in the conference room, in the boardroom, you will have the best decisions. Have you ever counted the IQ of a meeting? Is it equal to the sum of the IQs of the people? Same in football. A football team, if you have football players, the greatest football players put in one team, does that make the best team? Not always sure. Good governance is good governance. One size fits all. If it were that easy, we would know about it. Private governance is equal to public governance. I'm going to go deeper into that because I think it's an interesting example that we can learn from. And definitely, I mean, good governance will prevent scandals. And if that was also true, we would not hear that many scandals around us. So let's start with the first myth. We have, as the first myth, governance is sexy because it talks about power, and the ones exercises power, while compliance is boring. But what is also true is that both of these words, governance and compliance, are the best kept secrets. What is behind governance? What is behind compliance? Everybody talks about it. No one knows what it is behind it. Some people consider that within compliance, you have antitrust, you have customer protection, you have cybersecurity. Some prefer not to pull those into compliance and only refer to conflict of interest and anti-corruptions. So this is definitely a concern, and within governance law, we've tried to make a visual presentation of what is compliance so that people who want to act upon it know what it is all about that they need to take as measures. But governance is also a very strange beast. We have found dozens of definitions of even corporate governance only. For me, I'm going to take one, and good governance is the organizational design aiming at making decisions eyes wide open in the best interest of the company. Organizational design, I'm going to come back to on that. Eyes wide open decisions, we can all understand it's self-explanatory. What is the best interest of the company? We know that customers buy their products 50% based on the quality of the products, 50% based on the reputation of the company. So your reputation is based on your ethics, is based also on your way of living your values. So definitely, this is an important element to put into your strategy in moving forward. Talents. Talents are also seeking to find jobs within companies that have values and live them. Bankers, investors, they want to invest into companies which have ESG and comply with ESG criteria, environment, social, and governance criteria. So definitely, if you tell me what your compliance is, your governance is, I'm going to be able to tell you what your compliance is. It is true that if you don't embed compliance within your governance process, I'm not going to be able to tell you what your compliance is. I'm also going to be able to tell you what your brand attractiveness is going to be for employees, for customers, and for bankers and investors. So this is so important that you understand that the compliance is becoming a big and important asset for the companies and part of the bigger strategy. But that would be all clear if everybody was rational. But our CEOs, our board members, all that rational? I don't know if you ever read the book of Eugene Soltis, and as compliance officer, you should be doing it as of today. Why they do it? Eugene was interviewing all white-collar criminals and trying to understand why they did it. How come that they have been smart people getting to the top of their company and still they're entering into these dysfunctions and malfunctions? The fact is, he discovered that they're not calculating cost-benefit of what they're doing. They're acting instinctively. A CEO was, for example, sharing insider information with a friend just to helping out. The Dieselgate, these engineers were trying to solve an issue. They were not thinking about the harm that was creating far away. They were just trying to solve a small issue. And so what is important to understand is that people react instinctively and not rationally. And I will share an example of mine. I've been most of my career into legal, into audit, into governance, explaining to the teams how they should react, not crossing their delegations, in antitrust, not having meetings with competitors. And still, the day I put the hat as responsible for a commercial division, I totally forgot about it. I was with my team discussing a big contract, and I was ready to sign it. And hopefully, my financial controller told me, stop, Catherine, you cannot do that. I mean, this is definitely beyond your powers. And same when I had a meeting with a competitor who was also a customer. Hopefully, my legal told me, come on, Catherine, you've been advocating that all along, and today you're entering into a mismatch and trying to have a meeting with a competitor without having a clear agenda. How come that you have been all totally forgetting about it? And it is true, it is my experience. When you change hats, you forget, you have focusing on your results, you're focusing on your strategy, and there are all of these elements that you know perfectly about that you tend to forget. And that is why what is very important is to have an organizational design around you that helps you identify these issues and stop you before you make a mistake. So that is an important one as well that I want to share with you. The other one, the brilliant minds around the table, that's for sure, that's an important one. But the example of Eugene Soltis again, he was saying that there was a CEO in the Silicon Valley who had been hiring a new CFO who brought in with him a stock option scheme, very creative, very interesting. But the CEO was some time of a Steve Jobs-like person. He was mostly a visionary, and he was a technological mind, but he didn't feel comfortable in what related to legal and to finance. So he had put around him an organizational design because he knew and he acknowledged his weaknesses. He questioned a lawyer who is not in the Silicon Valley, where everyone was using that scheme, and he asked that person to give him some input on this. And that lawyer, further off, said, no way this can ever be legal. And hopefully, he did follow that advice. He did decide to pass this great scheme and to move forward. The other companies got caught when it was requalified. And hopefully, the point is so much being there, acknowledging your weaknesses, acknowledging where you're best and where you're not good, and organizing yourself to cope with those weaknesses is an important element that you should be taking care of. The organizational design next to the awareness and the trainings and all of these informations are very important. And the diversity of the perspective, we all talk about gender, but there's age, there's competencies, but there's geographies as well that are elements that you need to take care of and ensure that you have around the table to make sure that you're taking the best decisions with the proper eyes wide open information. Another element, knowing your weaknesses, acknowledging your weaknesses. I heard just before that CEOs sometimes forget about taking the trainings. This is important for everyone. Governance is governance. There is a one-size-fits-all. Too easy. You have plenty of different laws and soft laws, hard laws, company laws, soft laws being the self-regulation, the corporate codes. And you have the company's own laws, being their code of conduct, being their values, and all of that is the framework. But there's many, many different types of companies. You have different type of shareholding that you have around. Listed companies, family companies, state-owned companies, a mix of the above. NGOs, startups, all have different important challenges. I mean, listed companies have to go more for transparency and insider information, conflict of interest. Family companies have completely different challenges. And if a CEO who is founding his company wants to buy a jet, I mean, fine by him. Would you have to justify that a listed company buys a jet when it's not in the purpose of the company? Bit more difficult to justify. Maybe you find a business case if you're traveling a whole lot, but let's say, and in a state-owned company, I mean, difficult to justify, or in NGO. So as a compliance officer, what you need to think about is that you need to reflect upon the maturity of your company, the context of your company, the geographies of your company. There is no one-size-fits-all, of course. We have all kinds of guidance, but there is definitely something for you to think about. And what we used at the time I was working in corporate companies, we used the Financial Times rules. And I also visited a company in Silicon Valley where they had make mom proud within their values. Those are two showstoppers that you can use. If the decision and the topic that you're working on would be presented in the front page of the Financial Times, how would you look at it? That is a big eye-opener if you ever confronted with dilemmas. Same, would you tell that story to your mom? Would you be proud? Or would she be proud of you? Would you decide this information? These are showstoppers that you can use and remember to the people. I think what is also important is to have a common vocabulary in the organization. That is not accusing, that is not putting guilt on the people. No, just, is your mom going to be proud? That is just a very sneaky way to express yourself. People understand it and like it, and they're not confronted. They're just going to be realizing it's an important thing to look at. Another one, the public governance compared to the private governance. That I want to thank Renaud Whitmer, who is in Belgium, somebody who's been studying that, and I found it very striking, and that's why I wanted to share it with you today. We've had in Belgium a scandal within a public company, a state-owned company, I mean. It was a small company distributing electricity and gas, and they decided to grow, enter into new sectors, telecommunication, media, green energy, and all of that. And at some point, they've managed to get out of the control of the states, and they got caught for a scandal. I make the story very short, but at some point, they were supposed to carve out some of these new assets that were not part of their core business at the start. And what they found as a great idea was to sell some of these assets to companies of members of the board of directors at discounted price. Needless to say, not done. The government, the local government, decided to take a corporate code and a decree, and that was the principles and the best practices that had to be followed because that would bring good governance. At the same time, the private sector was also revisiting its own corporate codes. And both were looking, these are the good things to do. These are the right things to do. So let's focus on those. Striking for me was that even though both had been saying that these are the good principles, the good governance approach that we should be taking, both had completely different approaches. One about the size of the board. Board needs to be fit to the decision so that people can decide and discuss and meet regularly, so usually less than 10. For the public sector, it was maximum 15, not very far away. The selections of the board members, it was transparent in the private sector. In the public sectors, a representative of each party that was governing at the time. Makes sense. I mean, it's public money. It has to be managed by the ones who have been chosen by the citizens. So it all makes sense. Maybe the way the parties choose their candidates is less transparent, but let's see. Criteria in the private company, competence, expertise, knowledge of the sectors, none of that in the public sectors. Remuneration, also low, independent board members, not so much into public companies. So you could think that private approach is better, but good governance doesn't prevent scandals. The company I was talking about was a company where the private company principles have been followed. They have been having board members that are competent, they're well remunerated, they have had independent directors. Still, they managed to decide to sell these assets at discounted price to members of the boards. So what does it take? It does take definitely people with values. And this is something that you all know as compliance officers and to which you're confronted with. I mean, it's not all of what you can say, all of what you can do. If the people don't have the right values or the courage to speak up, it will be an issue. And definitely, I mean, what is important is that the chair of the board is the one having the most values. It's important to select the people for their integrity. The independent directors who have not interest into the shareholding specifically should have the courage to speak up. That is very important. We know that statistically in a group, you have 20% of people being ethicists, 2 to 5% likely to be criminals, and the rest is influenced by the context. So the context is important. If you have somebody with strong values, he's going to be picking up. If you have people who are going to be having the courage to speak up, they will be able to maybe influence the context. But that is definitely a challenge to find the people that are integral. So, conclusion. Compliance is definitely a part and an important part of your governance. You need to bring it into the strategy, and it is helping out your company. You need people with strong values. You need people who have the courage to speak up. The tools, the trainings, all of that, fine, but you can still come to jail because even though you have had 7 or 10 trainings on anti-corruption. What you need is people with the right approach and the right values, and also the organizational design, helping them out, remembering what it is all about. Because indeed, I mean, I don't want to plead guilty. Clearly, I mean, these best-intended amnesia, I had it, I experienced it. And it is not something that is unusual. I'm sure I'm not an exception into that. So make sure that governance is also a tool that you use within your compliance programs. Thank you, and I'm welcoming any questions.
Merci beaucoup, Catherine de Dorlodot. Dear ECEC community, if you have any questions, then do add them just to the right of the screen you'll see under this session Q&A, and we'll get your questions to Catherine. Catherine, in the meantime, I have a couple of questions for you. So you talk about one size doesn't fit all, and that's clear depending on the different kinds of boards. But there must be some clear common denominators for good governance. Can you just go over some of those again?
I mean, those are the ones that you find in those governance codes. I mean, and these are mostly the selections of the board members. That is an important criteria, that you have independent directors within the board that's also a good practice. It's not always easy. I mean, when you have a startup, they will not have so much money to pay independent directors. They will have mentors. Family companies, they have a hard time having external views in their company, looking at how they do it or advising. Some know better, and depending on the generation that they have within evolving. And you have also, I mean, in bigger companies, you will have some specific committees, audit committees that are going to be instructing mostly on the financials and the audits and the risks and compliance mostly, and that's where indeed most of the compliance officer will certainly report to, at least in the best organization. You have the HR and remuneration committee for all of what relates to social aspects. And you have sometimes, not always, the strategic and investment committees that are coming in. So that is important. And one last piece of advice, board members need to think individually. They need to think with intellectual honesty and then act as a collegial group, as a team. But the first thing is you need to act for yourself first and then go with the team and the best decisions for the company.
Thank you, Catherine. I see we have a question from Rui Duarte. Thanks for sending your question in. Do you think business schools are turning out graduates with the right ethical values?
I don't think it's a matter of business schools. I think for me, my kids are just in business schools today, and they are very much concerned about circularity, about environment. They're much more considering the stakeholders' values. So definitely, I think business schools are bringing people to the working floor that are very well trained. The thing is, I mean, and that is important, that when we're in a company, we're very much focused on what we need to achieve, the objectives that we receive. And it is sometimes more into the incentives that you have in the company that you need to think about it. Because I was confronted with a company where attitude was indeed part of the evaluation, but nobody was ever fired because of the wrong attitude if they were achieving the best results. So that's where the limits comes in. I mean, lead by example and the context. Make sure the context is there.
And perhaps the consequences, which leads to the next question. How often do you think should a board review its effectiveness? Annually or less often?
It's board effectiveness. I mean, that depends how you see it. But board evaluations, we can do that annually or every 3 years. That depends. If the team is there and stable, then you should start at some point rapidly when you have a stable team to have a board evaluation of its effectiveness. But what is interesting in the recent board I'm attending is that we have received instructions from the shareholders asking us to focus on more of the environmental aspects, which were not specifically on the agenda. And the COVID has forced us also to rethink our risk management and our risk maturity. And one last thing that I wanted to mention, because it's today an important topic, about whistleblowers. Whistleblowers can force us to I adapt our risk assessments because our experience with the clients is that with the whistleblowing alerts that we've been receiving for them, none of them were part of their risk map. So it was interesting. You need to be always and constantly open, always and constantly aware that things can come from different places, but it is best practice to have a regular evaluation of the board, and certainly.
Okay, Katrien, I don't know if you saw that. We also had a very nice feedback from the viewer, great presentation. And we've got time for one more question, so I'll take the question from Malte Torba. Do you believe the Chief Compliance and Ethics Officer should be a board member? This comes up often, where to place compliance in the organization.
No, I don't think, no, I think you need to have the responsible within the organization who is in charge, not that, compliance and ethics is everyone's business. It's not the compliance officers, it's not anyone, it's a behavior. So it's for everyone to do acts with integrity. The compliance officer is going to be the one assuring that it's converted into the whole organization. Within the board, you will have in the audit committee some specific people who are going to be acquainted with the matter and who are going to be able to ask the right questions and challenge or coach the members of the organization. But I think it's smart to have two different roles. Within the board, you have one who is interested in the audit committee, most likely, to question all of these issues and give some guidance or challenge and reveal, because 4 eyes is always better than 2. So that's a bit my advice. Keeping one in the organization, one at the board.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us here in Munich today, Katrien. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.
Dear ECEC community, you've sent in loads of questions. Thank you so much for that. And I just wanted to let you know that the top 20 questions from each day will actually be then answered. If we didn't have time to answer them at the time, they'll be answered in a blog after the conference. And now we're rather excited about our next very illustrious speaker.